And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network, here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The naked city, the city of 1,000 stories, the city and the state, it would appear, without a baseball team. We'll touch on that in just a moment. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Our all anti-billionaire baseball boys club Twitter feed at Pawtucket is home. And of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. This week that site's been up and down a couple times through the miracle of GoDaddy, and all of a sudden their seemingly inexplicable inability to simply link an IP address. Well, independent media, IT magic at work. So later on the show, we're going to hit on some of the more topical issues. We'll be talking about the primaries. We'll be talking about perhaps a potential power vacuum and what's up for grab with the GA. As clearly, it was, in some sense, it was a changing of the guard last night, particularly in the Republican Party. We'll talk about a few of the issues surrounding Rhode Island. But tonight, of course, as you saw in the run-up to today's show, Grant Welker is joining us again from the Worcester Business Journal. Grant, if you remember, was on the show last year. We had a great conversation, really kind of getting a sense of the business community in Worcester, getting a feel for what potentially would happen. We both left the conversation thinking, odds of some baseball team ending up in Worcester? Probably not so good. But, it was fun to kind of conjecture and talk about it. Well, a lot's happened in a year. Some positives, some negatives, clearly another changing of the guard. And we're going to dive right into that. First of all, Grant, thank you so very much on a Friday night for joining us, and welcome back to the Coalition.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
Let's do a little bit of a rehash for people who may not have seen last year's show. Fairly or unfairly, I draw something of a comparison in our local market between your publication and the Providence Business News. Both serious analysis of ongoing business issues, a real watchdog over local business activity, sort of a town crier, if you will, for the comings and goings of local businesses, and clearly a publication that has its finger right on the pulse, not of the hype surrounding some of the current issues, but actually immersed, as really is your mission, with the business community in Worcester itself. But give us a little flavor of your publication and Worcester, and a year later, what the temperature is like in Worcester as an economy, and the big picture.
Sure. So at the Worcester Business Journal, we're online every day. We have a daily e-newsletter that goes out each weekday at noon, and that's the bulk of what we do. We also print every other week, and that is when we have a chance to go into more long-form stories. In our most recent print issue, we talked about how long of a build-up the inevitable deal, or what it ultimately became the deal between the Paw Sox and Worcester, was actually years in the making, because Worcester city leaders have really craved a team of their own. And I was surprised when we spoke early last winter. I didn't think this deal was going to happen, simply because I thought that that Rhode Island and Pawtucket wanted the team badly enough to pay for a new stadium, and I didn't expect that Worcester would pay nearly as much as they did. To borrow $101 million for the stadium, the state is pitching another $35 million at least. It's far more than what I and many others expected. And I keep contrasting the two situations when in Rhode Island, the legislature was battling over this for several years, and it went through the House, went through the Senate, went through the governor's office. It was at the Pawtucket City Council level. In Massachusetts, it took as few as 8 people to be on board with this: the governor, the Worcester city manager, and a majority of the 11-seat Worcester City Council was all it took to be on board for this. So it never had to go through the legislature here as it did in Rhode Island. So the state's $35 million in infrastructure and other improvements was never debated publicly. And once it came to Worcester City Council, it moved through quite quickly with very little dissension on the council.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that it's excited many in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I think they see it. Worcester, like Pawtucket with Providence, sort of sees itself as the little sibling to Boston, always kind of wanting to step out of Boston's shadow. And they see this as a way to sort of trumpet themselves as having the Boston Red Sox top minor league team, something that no other city and no other New England competitors, Providence, Hartford, and others have. So it's an emotional high that started almost a month ago when this letter of intent was announced, and it continued through the city council approval the other night, and even within a few moments of them approving the deal, the mayor announced that there's going to be a big celebration Monday evening outside City Hall, and there's going to be fireworks, and they're going to have Paw Sox players and Boston Red Sox legends. So the city is really riding very high on this one.
Yeah, in fact, one of your wags, if you will, from the Worcester area sent us an invite, if you will, to one of the Citizens Group Facebook pages, inviting us to the celebration. And my response was, if I didn't have a prior commitment that night for the Libertarian Party, I would be glad to be there and actually celebrate alongside of you. It wouldn't be a problem at all. I'm almost kind of disappointed that Mr. Lucchino didn't invite myself and a few other involved folks with the group, but I guess I'm not on the Thanksgiving list either at any point in time soon. Full disclosure, probably 7 or 8 months ago, I reached out, and won't say who they are, to a number of folks in the progressive community in Massachusetts, and reached out to them and said, are you aware this is happening? Are you concerned about this at all? Because of the obvious implications to taxpayers, what kind of money was going to be spent in an area of, I won't say austerity in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts has always been much more conservative with regard to these style of investments. This is a real mold breaker. I mean, it's ironic in one sense because the state that's known for its largesse and, kind of caving in the car business, we call it being a laydown for every single type of investment like this, ultimately created I believe, somewhat intentionally, a formula where they said no, to the state which has held back from investing in private sports franchises infrastructure, said yes in a very, very big way. These progressive folks, they just didn't seem concerned. Was there ever, or is there any significant opposition to this at this point in the community?
Not that I've seen. There was one city councilor, Constantina Lukes, who did vote against the project the other night, and she was concerned about not having enough information yet. This is something that went through from the unveiling of the letter of intent in mid-August until now, quite quickly, at least in terms of how relatively slowly things usually work at the municipal or state level. And she was worried about the risk, frankly, the financial risk that the city is taking in borrowing $101 million, getting about $36 million or so back from the team in terms of upfront cash and about $1 million a year in rent.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, there were a few public input sessions in which a lot of the feedback was positive. We've heard from a lot of neighborhood leaders urging this on. And as you said, for a state that was 20 years ago ready to let the Patriots leave for Hartford because they weren't willing to pay for a new Foxborough Stadium, it was very surprising to see the state pitch in as much as it has in this case. Of course, Fenway Park being more than a century old, it's not quite the same comparison there, but there was no state dollars that paid for that. TD Garden with the Bruins and Celtics is privately owned.
Right.
Bob Kraft has been working to try to find a new location for the Revolution in Dorchester and other areas around Boston, and it hasn't happened. And frankly, it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of appetite for public dollars for that project.
Right.
And yet, in this case, with no debate at the state level, again, in contrast to Rhode Island, this went through very quickly. In terms of the state's funding, the state has a very generous multi-billion-dollar life sciences program. It did give money to GE to relocate from Fairfield, Connecticut, but that was something that, although the governor was able to do with his own discretionary funds, was debated pretty fiercely in terms of whether it was something the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts should be doing for such a large and wealthy company. And a lot of critics in a case with sports teams will also say that the Pawtucket Red Sox ownership has money to pay for. And that's a big criticism, is that a lot of municipalities, counties, or states are using their hard-earned taxpayer dollars to pay for something that ownership could pay for. But we also see it with the emotion involved, both in Worcester with how excited people are, and in Pawtucket how downtrodden a lot of people feel of losing what they see as a key element of their community. There is a lot of emotion in it. It depends on how much of a dollar figure you want to put on that emotion for having a minor league team or a professional team in your city.
Right.
It's something that Massachusetts has otherwise been able to separate, I think, in terms of going back to the Patriots, where people feel like Bob Kraft may have used Hartford in the end to kind of show leaving. Massachusetts did commit, I believe it was in the range of $70 million for Route 1 infrastructure funding, which compared to how much is offered these days is not so large, and in fact may not be too much different from what will be contributed from the state level for the Worcester project.
Well, and what's stunning to me is, and based on the kind of numbers I saw with the GE investment, based what I saw with the numbers for the infrastructure surrounding Gillette Stadium, what's stunning to me is that the numbers, and this is a combination of both state and local numbers, that are being bandied about with this investment are relatively in the same range, which is astonishing because you're talking about an NFL franchise, a Fortune 100 company, and a AAA baseball club. There's you got to kind of take a deep breath and go, wow. Is during this conversation, and there's great irony in that one of the great minds in sports economics is literally, according to some rumors, probably from his office desk going to be able to watch the games at the temporary home next summer, because the rumors are afoot that the Paw Sox are out of town. That in fact discussions are being had with the College of the Holy Cross. Did this just sneak up on the opponents? Was it just too quick, if you will, for people who would potentially fight this on a basis of fiscal prudence?
It could. Again, it was surprising to me to see how much money Worcester was willing to spend up front on this. I expected it to be maybe half of the amount that it ultimately ended up being. I also thought that when it came to time of Worcester saying this is what our pitch is for the team, that Pawtucket and Rhode Island would have one more chance to counteroffer. And it looks like maybe some Rhode Island officials and Pawtucket officials maybe let emotion get the better of them, because their response at that point seemed to be a little bit of, all right, forget about you guys then, when maybe they would have had a chance to come back with a better deal like Massachusetts was with the Patriots, when it looked like a done deal that the Patriots would be going to Hartford.
Right. So
it was, I think a few people in Worcester see it as they really had to blow the team away with a great offer. They clearly did. The team has talked about wanting to be in Worcester because of how warm of a welcome they've received, and certainly they have. It certainly gives the impression of being about the money more than anything else. For one thing, they're going to a fairly considerably smaller market
Right.
The Worcester region compared to the Providence region. They've pitched it as, and for another thing, it's very marginally closer to Boston. It's essentially no closer to Boston than where the team has played before. The team has said that they wanted to be closer to northern New England, but that takes them further away from Providence, further from Fall River, New Bedford, and the Cape. And if you're going towards northern New England, you have Manchester, New Hampshire, you have Portland, Maine, two cities that already have their own double league baseball teams. In Portland's case, they already have a Boston Red Sox affiliate. I wouldn't anticipate maybe too many people making that drive. And for another thing, Worcester is only marginally closer to those two cities than Pawtucket is. I think it was simply the team got so much of an offer from Worcester that they felt like they couldn't turn it down.
Well, and you've got Lowell as well, don't you? I mean, you
have the Lowell Spinners, yeah, single A team. That's
right. So I mean, you and as the crow flies, you're talking a 30-year and understanding that the season is going to be longer with Worcester. But this is what's fascinating to me on a couple of different levels. First of all, you have direct competition with the Spinners. And the Spinners is, again, potentially shorter season, but it's a very well-regarded product in a stadium that's, considered, thought of as highly as a destination. The words "it's a great take" have been applied to Lowell almost as in the last few years as it's been applied to Pawtucket. But I think what's fascinating, where the disconnect is taking place, is that there's a significant part of Rhode Island that basically, as my father would say, don't let the door be hitting you on the arse on the way out, laddie. And not so much for the money thing, but there were multiple insults first of all, to Pawtucket during the initial run-up to the Providence stadium proposal. Then all of a sudden, when the Pawtucket Red Sox became the jilted lover, there was this appeal to Pawtucket without any sense of irony whatsoever about how quickly they were willing to ditch Pawtucket just 2 years before. You've got the 38 Studios issue, and you've got an overwhelming level of disgust. So there are those of us who conjecture that of the two proposals afforded Pawtucket, one, of course, was the Senate. You've got a guy named Conley who runs Senate Finance, for whom part of Pawtucket is in his turf. And the Pawtucket contingent was clearly in the tank. Financial issues, economics, it meant nothing to them. Absolutely nothing. They wanted their stadium. They wanted their toy. They didn't care. But the rest of the state was very receptive to the fact, and I'm talking about taxpayers, because believe me, the state establishment, if you will, and I mean that the paper of record, the Providence Journal, the political leaders want to give no credit whatsoever to the opposition groups for their, and myself personally included, for their years of literally of effort of just saying no, 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 no. So the funny thing is that there's a lot of people at Pawtucket are ready to do the victory lap, and I've gotten a couple of nannies. We got them, and we're like, cool. We dodged a bullet.
It may turn out that Pawtucket ends up getting, say, a collegiate baseball league team, which has been talked about. And in fact, Worcester is going to be, in all likelihood, it appears, losing its very popular collegiate baseball league team, the
Bravehearts.
It's hard to imagine Worcester having room for two baseball teams.
It's quite honestly, many of us think it's hard for them to consider having room for one. But we've had on this show Chris, who is the commissioner of the Futures Collegiate Baseball League, and he has said quite bluntly that he is willing to talk to people about moving a franchise to McCoy Stadium. And here's the shocker: he actually mentioned the R word, and I'm not going to speak for him at this point, but he went on the air publicly and said he'd actually pay rent. Oh, imagine! He'd pay his own way, and it's a reflection of the facility, the community, and I don't doubt for a moment, having seen the Bravehearts, having seen a number of teams in the league, that he would that they would be embraced in Pawtucket. Are you still out there? Do we have a frozen signal? We're going to call out to our erstwhile tech department. I think we have a little bit of a frozen signal here. But in that respect, um, it's even today on the Lively experiment. Jim Hummel was kind enough to have me on his show again today. Like taking aside while we're resolving some technical communication issues, but Billy Lynch, the famous, respected, yet at the same time interesting former head of the Democratic Party, clearly part of the Lynch family, significant contributors to the history of Pawtucket. It was proffered by the crew that on the show that somehow that the Rhode Islanders were upset about losing the team, which to a certain degree they were, but that's been conflated too many times with the notion that Rhode Islanders were so upset that they would have actually paid anything to keep the team. And as I like to say, they're more, and they use that, they base that, quite frankly, on how many people showed up at these hearings. Well, let's be blunt. Most of the people at the Pawtucket Red Sox hearings were canned, sort of, they were homers, to use the baseball terminology. Absolute homers. They were far more interested in protecting their own little personal stakes, whether it be, actual charitable contributions, whether it be business connections, who knows. So, like I said, we joke that you'd have more people paying for more paid attendance at a hearing than you would a baseball game. Not good. How we doing? We trying to get him back?
I'm trying. Yep.
The joys of live media. By the way, the Lively experiment probably on right now as we speak. If you got a chance to watch it, Michelle Smith from the Associated Press, Dan Riley, counsel to the Republican Party, as well as former state representative, and of course, Mr. Lynch, the aforementioned Mr. Lynch, as well as myself, talked about the primary elections. As we like to say on the show, Jim Hummel does. Now, Dave Lehman was filling in. Jim Hummel's done a marvelous job of recasting and reinvigorating that media effort. It is no longer the deadly experiment under the able hands of one Jim Hummel and his crew there. So, the any
No, he's not online. Want me to cut audio? You want me to cut audio?
Yeah, we're going to take a second. Folks, you're listening to the Coalition. We've lost our connection with our guest, Grant Welker. He is up from the Worcester Business Journal through the miracle of Skype connecting to us. Skype's not being too miraculous right now. So we're going to just take a quick break.
Do I have you back? All right. Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Screen went dark and
And we're back after a brief technical glitch through the miracle of Skype. Grant Welker from the news editor of the Worcester Business Journal is joining us, and we're talking all things Paw Sox right now. So to sort of sum up, I was kind of in my own roundabout, wordy way. Do you think... Boy, we're professional tonight. Wow. Is there any recognition by the Worcester community that a lot of us are actually glad they got the team?
No. One Worcester City Councilor the other night said, hey, if these deals for ballparks are so bad, like critics say, why is Pawtucket and why is Rhode Island so upset about losing the team? I don't know, just in terms of the front page of the Telegram and Gazette in Worcester the day after the letter of intent, I remember it said Grand Slam. And I looked at the front page of the Providence Journal the next day, and if I remember right, it said game over. So certainly, at least at the early stage of this, I think there is still a lot of emotion. The letdown among many in Rhode Island of having lost something that they see as integral for their community. And in Worcester, a lot of people are saying, holy cow, we actually are going to get the finally the Boston Red Sox. So,
but that's what I'm debating in a sense. The media would have you believe that Rhode Islanders are heartbroken. Most Rhode Islanders aren't.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I'd love to see a poll,
right?
Some public polling done to see how people feel about it, and to think of should Pawtucket residents be upset about losing the team? So that depends on how much of a dollar figure you put on being able to say Paw Sox and Pawtucket Red Sox instead of saying Woo Sox or Worcester Red Sox.
Right.
And honestly, it depends on how much of an appetite for risk you have. If you say we're willing to risk $101 million in other cases to have this ballpark, a city-owned ballpark, in Worcester's case, at least city councilors and many who've spoken publicly say they're absolutely excited and willing to take on that risk of a stadium in which many economists will point out the naming rights revenue, it's expected to be called Polar Park for polar beverages.
Right.
That revenue will go to the team. Concession revenue, advertising revenue inside the ballpark will go to the team. If another team, say a local college, uses the park for their own baseball team, that money even goes to the team and not to the city. So there's many aspects of this that seem very team friendly. That's not necessarily unusual. That's the case for a lot of municipalities or states that badly want a team to call their own. And the way it tends to be these days is a lot of the revenue, even though it would be a city-owned ballpark, the revenue would go towards the team.
Right.
So economists would tell you, and many city officials in Worcester will tell you those economists are wrong, that these deals simply do not typically make sense for municipalities to take on, where a lot of the risk lies on the city in this case, not on the team.
Right.
It's a city-owned park. If there is construction overages, those would be picked up by the team. But if there's any delay in the related development that would accompany the ballpark or is expected to accompany the ballpark, that shortfall will be on taxpayers of Worcester. They do have a developer lined up for that related development. And they expect that construction would start soon and the first phase would be open in time for the ballpark for the 2021 season.
Right.
However, there are cases of that not working out necessarily either. And to use another Connecticut example, in Hartford,
Right.
they built a AA ballpark for the Yard Goats. In that case, that ballpark opened a year late. It opened for last season. The same developer that was hired to build the ballpark was the same construction company that was going to build the related development around that ballpark. The construction process was badly delayed. The city ended up firing that construction company. They ended up firing them from the related development around it as well. So that development around the park in Hartford that was expected, like in Worcester's case, to pay for that city's investment has not started yet, and is not entirely close to being started yet, never mind being open in time for the ballpark's opening, which is what is expected in Worcester. So city officials believe that the related development will happen, and they believe it will happen soon, which it would need to be open in time for the start of the ballpark. There are a lot of other cases with other ballparks that just because a stadium is there doesn't necessarily mean that people want to open a restaurant right nearby or live right nearby. And in fact, you only need to look to Pawtucket with McCoy Stadium that's been there for several generations, and it has similar highway access as the Canal District site in Worcester, and it's surrounded by, McCoy is surrounded largely by some industrial properties, a school, and a residential neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see around McCoy that there was ever enough of a demand for new housing, like the type of that they envision in the Canal District in Worcester, where you would have, say, a 4, 5, 6-story building with residences upstairs, and you would have a first floor restaurant or other retail. That's what they're envisioning here. They're also envisioning a few hotels. But in a case where it could happen organically, such as in Pawtucket, that hasn't happened at all. And to look at a lot of other minor league ballparks, that hasn't happened either. There are some cases where it has, such as in Charlotte or in Nashville. Those are certainly much larger cities and much faster growing cities than Pawtucket or Worcester. So generally speaking, the Worcester deal could certainly work out as city officials say it will. It would have to be the exception to the norm in terms of what we've seen for similar ballpark deals and ballpark related developments elsewhere.
Yeah, I was just doing a little, just some due diligence here. I would tell people in Worcester to go to Google something called the Steel Yard in Gary, Indiana. And we use that as an example a lot. No ancillary development. Atlantic City, no ancillary development. Most of the cities, no ancillary development. I think there's the Durham Bulls team has become, or the Bulls have become sort of a poster child for what can go right. What's not often mentioned is that you've got a highly dynamic economy already in place there.
Absolutely.
So the notion that somehow this is tied directly into just simply the existence of a baseball team, I personally feel is nonsense. You know, if you drop a baseball team into a highly dynamic economy which is rife with development, well, surprise, surprise, there's going to be some development in the area. Whether or not there's anything more than a tangential relationship with the baseball team is clearly pure conjecture.
And people mention as examples too Fenway Park or Wrigley Field, and those are two ballparks that are amazing to see games for, in a large part because they are surrounded by dense, tightly built neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. Of course, those are ballparks that have been around for 100 plus years, and they're right in the middle of very large cities.
Right, and they're also major.
No matter what was around Fenway Park, if you took Fenway Park out right now, it's right near Kenmore Square, Boston University, Northeastern University, and other schools and hospitals. It would be booming regardless of what was there. And
exactly.
Similar case for the north side of Chicago. Again, it just, you have to think of, you know, in Worcester's Canal District, and say even the same deal with the Apex site in Pawtucket. If the city in each of those cases wants to jumpstart development, economists would generally argue that paying for a new ballpark is not the way to do it.
Correct.
In Worcester's case, it's a largely vacant site. It's been contaminated. We actually, in fact, don't know the full extent of what contaminated land, what type of cleanup is needed before the ballpark is built. So if the city were to pay tens of millions of dollars to jumpstart development there, a lot of economists will tell you that building a ballpark is not the best way to do it. It does create a lot of buzz, and a lot of officials in Worcester have said, look at how much press we've gotten, and there is certainly a benefit to that. But in terms of what has the best return for your dollar investment as a municipality, a lot of experts who study this will say you could create incentives for businesses to locate there, or you could do a little bit of what Massachusetts is doing anyway, create infrastructure improvements and do other things to try to spur businesses to locate there. In Worcester's case, with the Canal District, nearby there are a lot of restaurants, but this site by itself is very run down. It's not far from downtown, it's not far from the highway, but it hasn't really seen much new development in many, many years. So if there's a demand for development there anyway, economists will tell you that you're taking that new additional revenue that would otherwise go to the city's general coffers, and you're taking that revenue for a special ballpark development district and devoting that extra revenue to pay off the ballpark bond.
Right.
If you think that there would be no development there unless there is a ballpark built, you're wagering that having a ballpark there is enough of a draw that hundreds of people will want to live there, that restaurants will want to open there, and that people will want to stay at hotel rooms there. Certainly, again, it's a risk either way, and it's one that, for a lot of people who study these types of projects, will say more times than not, they don't work out as anticipated. The city, in this case, in Worcester, will say that they've been very conservative in their math in terms of what additional revenue will pay for this stadium.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other issue that it belies is whether or not there will be any spin-off income from the actual event itself. Minor league baseball stadiums are built to increase the rate at which the baseball stadium can monetize the existing and hopefully increase traffic. And they do so by creating what I refer to as an insular environment. You know, many of these stadiums will have their own restaurants inside. They'll have their own, you know, I mean, look at Patriot Place. Clearly the poster child for this. Dozens of restaurants attached to it, you know, within the facility. Certainly no spur to investment beyond the grounds of Patriot Place itself. Baseball stadiums, particularly in the minor league, will actually take that one step further and integrate the restaurant experience right into the stadium. It's like a shopping mall. It's like a casino. There's no interest whatsoever in having you leave to go somewhere else. The other issue that's very often not discussed, and I work in Foxborough, Massachusetts. I see exactly what happens when you've got a Patriots game. No other business can exist then. The traffic is simply overwhelming. Whether it be a minor league team with 10 or 20,000 people showing up, in the best case, by the way, or an NFL team with 50 or 60,000 people showing up, you essentially block out the potential for any of those local businesses off-site because of traffic issues. And I go back to the Democratic National Convention in Boston. That was going to be a boon to the city. And as it was pointed out by the No Boston Olympics crowd, what ended up happening in reality is that, except for a handful of immediately adjacent facilities, the couple of principal hotels that were the headquarters, if you will, of the event, and the event forum itself, businesses ultimately ended up closing down for those couple of weeks. Security concerns, traffic concerns are crushing for these events. So not only do you not have any spin-off because of the design of the facility itself is designed to keep people inside. Again, it's not unlike Walmart trying to get someone. Let's just say hypothetically at a local Walmart, the average ticket is $25. Walmart is going to move heaven and earth to try and raise that to 40.
Right. Well, it's funny you mentioned a big box store. Yeah, so a few of the economists I talked to said the economic impact of a minor league stadium is actually pretty similar to a big box store or to a movie theater complex.
Exactly.
In terms of the number of people going in and out and the amount of money they spend. And to think of spending a lot of money, public money, for a big box store or for a movie theater complex is unheard of. You wouldn't do that. And you're right that economists also feel that minor league sports or professional sports, top-level sports, just move people's money around in terms of what they are expecting to spend on, let's call it entertainment or leisure money. So if you're going to go to a Patriots game or you're going to go to a Paw Sox game, that's money that you are now not going to spend on another weeknight at a local restaurant, let's say.
Or on a
If
local.
you're going to go to a Worcester Red Sox game on, say, a Wednesday night, you're going to maybe eat at the game, or maybe you eat at a new restaurant right outside. But it's money that you're spending. If you're spending it in the ballpark, that revenue again goes to the team. You're not spending it on, say, Shrewsbury Street or downtown at one of Worcester's well-known restaurants. And if you have been to a Red Sox game at all in recent years, they rope off Yawkey Way for more concessions. That's something something similar to that is what is envisioned in Worcester too. Beyond the right field line is that they would rope off that street and create new concessions, and the revenue from those concessions, even though they're right outside the ballpark, would go towards the team. And exactly. To think of what you're mentioning with Foxborough, in terms of what the team and what the stadium has meant for notoriety or name recognition for Foxborough, people all over the country know the name Foxborough. And many people, even maybe outside the country, say, oh, Foxborough, Massachusetts is where the Patriots play. But you're right in that how many of those people who might know of Foxborough from outside the region have been to Foxborough for reasons other than the Patriots game because of that name recognition?
Right.
Or for Pawtucket, for that matter, this is the questions that economists will ask in terms of what's the dollar value on that name recognition? How many people have spent time in Pawtucket other than going to a Paw Sox game because they knew of the name Pawtucket? It's tough to draw a line between knowing of that place and then choosing to spend money there. I think too, we could also look just west to Springfield. So Springfield has, of course, the Basketball Hall of Fame, and now has the MGM Springfield Casino and Hotel. And just over the town line in Agawam, it has Six Flags. Mm-hmm. Now, those are three attributes that any city of Springfield size or Providence size or Worcester size would love to have one or two or all three of those things.
Right.
But in terms of thinking of what spillover effect economically have those had is much harder to gauge, because Springfield and the Springfield area is not doing nearly as well economically as Massachusetts as a whole or the country as a whole in recent years. Springfield's population has barely budged, despite having those things like the Hall of Fame or the casino or Six Flags that any place would love to have again. But in terms of, do those things make Springfield a much more attractive place to live or work? I think many economists would argue that that's not really the case. And in an event like the casino or with the ballpark, many might even argue that instead of spending your money at a locally owned restaurant, you're then spending it at a place like MGM or at a ballpark where that money is going to an out-of-town owner.
Right, and this is a critical point, because what you're talking about in terms, from an economist's perspective, in terms of how the money is spent, is something called the substitution effect. If it's not spent at the baseball stadium, it will be spent on a local contractor, or dinner out, or fill in the blanks. What's critical is what's called the multiplier effect, and that is the efficiency at which the money spent rotates, if you will, through the economy, and how often it rotates through the economy. It can be argued that professional sports franchises effectively represent a form of capital flight, because a significant amount of the money will be taxed once, perhaps spent locally, but a equally significant amount of money will be a substantial amount of funds dedicated to salaries to people who do not live in the community. That money typically, a significant portion of which anyway, will leave the community almost instantly. So what you've got in the case of a baseball stadium is you've got a couple of things. First of all, a significant amount of economic activity is being redirected from the community at large and back into the stadium. So local businesses will in fact suffer. They will not benefit. Number two, money spent, if you will, by consumers will leave the economy in two ways, or three. A portion of it will go to the baseball club, which is owned largely by people outside of the Worcester economy. A significant portion may go towards repaying the funds made initially during the investment, but again, a significant amount of money will also leave the economy permanently. So none of which bodes well for actual grunt level economic activity in real dollars in the Worcester community. Activities like casinos, malls, baseball stadiums actually act as a net drain on local economies. And what I believe your folks in Worcester, and I don't want them to change a thing, as Billy Joel would say, don't go changing to try and please me. What I think is a case of, I'll call it governmental malpractice, is it's not obvious that they've done any real independent investigative economic impact statement on this, other than let's just say, a study by an individual who was, whose outcome was predetermined.
That is a criticism here, right? Is that an economist, Andrew Zimbalist, who has said that that no, stadiums typically do not pay for themselves.
Right.
He argues in Worcester's case that there's enough ancillary development that related development will pay for the state. He is someone, right, who has otherwise said that these don't work out. There doesn't appear to be a lot of otherwise outside scrutiny of this deal. The city auditor, who was part of the city administration, did review it as well and said that it will not be a drain on the taxpayers. But that's what we try to do as journalists, and what we've done at the Worcester Business Journal is talk to economists and put some public scrutiny on the deal, because it is a lot of money. And if people feel like the emotional attachment and that community aspect of having a team there is worth that investment, they will think that, and many do. But again, Worcester would have to overcome a rule elsewhere, the general outcome of these deals not working out. And that may certainly be that this is an exception to the norm. There's no evidence
Equally appalling as someone who spent a significant, or I should say a measurable part of the last 3.5 years of his life attending public hearings. What's equally breathtaking is the absence of any real public vetting or public hearings about the project in and of itself. Like I said, this seems to have been decided in a room. If you're a certain age, I'll just say that the organization benefiting from it is not dissimilar to Every Boy Needs a Band. And if you're of a more recent age, you say 3 words: monorail, monorail, monorail. This. I wonder if the city of Worcester can weather this type of. I won't use the survive word, although I guess I just did. But if this doesn't work out, and there's no reason to indicate that it will, you've got all the other issues. You've got a sport in decline, the absence of any track record of any professional level team exhibiting any level of financial success at all in the city's recent or even near recent history. You've got direct competition from other area baseball teams. If I could paraphrase what Jay Leno said to Hugh Grant on a certain late night Saturday Live after Hugh was caught, what were they thinking?
In this case, we could see it from the get-go with the announcement of the letter of intent with the team. Mm-hmm. That there was so much, and still is so much excitement in Worcester of, holy cow, we got the Red Sox top minor league team. That I think that I don't want to say that I think it's a big factor in people's judgment over whether this is a good deal. You mentioned, or you alluded to Victor Matheson at Holy Cross, right. A renowned economist who has been in my mind, the toughest critic of this deal, said that he believes that Worcester City officials have such a large chip on their shoulder, or such a large inferiority complex, that they would have done virtually anything to get this team, as he said. And I think that is certainly a factor here, is that Worcester wants to be seen as the little brother to Boston that could, and not be sort of left behind, that Worcester's kind of being carried along by Boston, that look, we have Boston's top team. And that makes me think of mentioning too that another reason why I was a bit surprised by the deal as it's taken place so far is that the Providence area is very well proven as an area that really supports its professional teams. The Paw Sox and the Providence Bruins have traditionally had great attendance. In Rhode Island, they are huge parts of the state's culture. And Worcester, through no fault of its own exactly, has had a lot of minor league teams come and go. Hockey, baseball, arena football. It's not as much of a proven entity in terms of supporting its minor league teams. I mentioned the Worcester Bravehearts earlier, a collegiate league team. They've had great attendance. And so from that aspect, there's no reason to necessarily think that they wouldn't support a Worcester Red Sox team. It's still surprising to see a little bit of how quickly it came together in terms of what we saw publicly. There were some murmurs here and there of the Paw Sox interest in Worcester. I thought it was funny that early this summer there was a buzz when all of a sudden Larry Lucchino was found in the Canal District walking around. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself that surely Larry Lucchino had walked through the Canal District before 2 months ago. And surely he's seasoned enough in public relations that he knew that walking around the Canal District would make headlines in Worcester and in right. Rhode Island, and of course it did when he was seen walking around there. But to think of the point where the team in the city of Worcester announced the letter of intent about a month ago, there was a lot of work that took place behind the scenes to that point, and from that point until now, the process has moved along about as quickly as any public process could, where the city has kind of rushed it along to say, we need to move quickly, right. We need to hire a project manager by October, we want to go out and issue our bond by October, we want to have shovels in the ground by July. The city has to buy a few existing businesses as well that are in the path of what will eventually become the stadium's right field.
Right.
Potential snag there of whether those businesses sell, if they sell for the amount that the city has budgeted for those sites, if those sites are cleared in time. I've covered it enough in my career as a journalist to know that any type of public project can be complicated by any number of things. This is certainly a very large project with a very fast timeline in terms of the stadium itself and the related development. And there's a lot of things that we don't know yet. I mentioned earlier the potential ground contamination that we don't know in terms of the potential cost or any type of time overrun. So although the project was approved this week by the City Council and it doesn't require legislative approval on Beacon Hill, there are some potential snafus on the way.
Oh, absolutely. Which is why it's astonishing they ran so hell-bent into it. This seems to be a classic case of ready, shoot, aim because of this perception of public pride. I mean, and listen, I get that to a certain degree, but these are the kind of reindeer games that, for example, happened with the Arizona Cardinals. These are the type of reindeer games which, quite frankly, have been a hallmark of Larry Lucchino's career. Did the town fathers at all consider what happened in San Diego, where taxpayers were left on the hook, and by this said same person?
I haven't heard the example of San Diego mentioned in Worcester. I have heard examples of, like I said before, the Charlotte minor league baseball team. Right. That was a case where much less public money was devoted towards that park, and again, Charlotte, a much larger, very booming city, and
absolutely.
Nashville. Those are downtown sites that undoubtedly those parcels around the ballpark would be developed one way or another. Whether the ballparks in those cases contributed, I'm sure they contributed. And just even looking on Google Street View, as I looked around at these other sites where they do have a lot of new residences popping up, the connection that a lot of economists struggle to make is how much of that is due to a stadium versus what that would have taken place anyway. And in fact, I've looked at a lot of other minor league stadiums that are not located in downtowns. They're kind of out in sort of a sea of parking spaces. So it's not even as much of a universal thing that a lot of areas are even looking to do this, to take developable downtown or near downtown sites and devote them to stadiums where, again, a lot of critics will say these stadiums sit empty most days out of the year. In this case, with the Worcester Stadium, they do want to have it available for collegiate league teams, high school teams, other public events.
Well, and let me just throw in the issue there. That actually even creates more of a problem, and I'll explain to you why. That same, the folks, Mr. Lucchino and his crew, are using the same playbook that they attempted to use in Providence. So let's turn this into a year-round facility. Sounds great until you understand the impact it will already have on existing year-round facilities. So, for example, here in Rhode Island, the Twin River Corporation now has an exclusive, effectively, for casino gaming. As part of their Lincoln, Rhode Island facility, there was never going to be a hotel. That was part of the agreement not to do that. All of these guys, whether it be stadiums, casinos, malls, they all play the stealth game. They get their hooks in, then they need this, then they need that, then they need this, then they need that. They need this concession to continue going. It's economic crack. And once you get hooked, you're done. So right now, the Twin River Corporation is in the process of christening its brand new hotel in Lincoln, Rhode Island. What's the problem there, right? Well, what if you're the hotel that's 2 miles away, that you built with your own risk capital as an entrepreneur, with loans and debt and all the other things that freestanding, free market companies actually have to deal with? Now you've got twofold issues. Number one, the same vacuum cleaner-like operation that's going to suck up consumer dollars and do all the things that we talked about earlier, that's going to actually get more powerful. On top of that, both in the case of Worcester and in the case of Pawtucket, you've got the reality that local businesses who are competing for that said same economic dollar, who are paying taxes, are now effectively, you ready for this? Their tax money that they're paying is going to subsidize, through the creation of a monopoly, their competition for their own dollar. Now, it's funny because when we posited that to the head of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce, he claimed to not have any idea what we were talking about. But again, this is fundamental economics. We're not even talking graduate level in most cases, whether it be the substitution principle, the multiplier effect. These are things typically you learn by November of your freshman year in college. Your Econ 101, that everybody's got to take. There's no genius to this. Now, obviously, the good professor at the Holy Cross takes it to a whole nother level through the econometric studies that he does routinely when analyzing these events across the country. Folks like the writer Neil DeMause, who wrote Field of Schemes, takes it to a whole nother level. The gentleman who's been hired by the city of Worcester, my words, not yours, has sold out at a whole nother level. But
he's so a bit on an island by himself in terms of the economists that we've talked to nationwide. And
right.
I think it's worth noting that a lot of the economists I talk to are not especially familiar with Worcester, and I think that can be an asset here because for some good reason, Worcester does have a chip on its shoulder, and Worcester does feel a lack of respect for what it has to offer. Mm-hmm. And many officials I've heard from in the last month or so in Worcester feel like people who criticize this deal are naysayers, people who they're haters towards Worcester.
Let me just jump in for a second. See, what you're saying is lock, stock, and smoking barrel out of exactly the game plan. You see, I'm one of the people that was called a naysayer and a hater. All right? And I was actually by a gentleman who's currently running for governor of the state of Rhode Island as an independent candidate, a guy named Joe Trillo, calls me Dr. Doom. Because I don't have anything good to say about anything. Exactly, naysayer, that's right out of their playbook. You know what else is right out of their playbook? These folks who do this actively seek communities through what a progressive friend of mine uses the term, he calls it economic racism. People who are looking for this type of development to sponsor it and to profit from it, whether it be this, prisons, casinos, they don't go after Holden. No one was going to go to the town fathers at Holden, Massachusetts and build a facility.
And that reminds me too of another point I think was very critical in this case of the team moving to Worcester is that Worcester, a city of almost 190,000 people and a budget of over $600 billion a year, I was right with the millions, not billions.
Give it time.
He's just saying billion, yeah. Worcester had much more an ability to pay for a stadium like this than certainly you mentioned like the example of Holden. Right. A lot of other smaller communities simply wouldn't have an economic ability, financial ability to pay for a stadium like this, or even compared to Pawtucket, which, although it's in Pawtucket because it's part of the Providence area, but Pawtucket, unfortunately for itself, the stadium is I think like 2 miles from the city line with Providence.
Right.
Pawtucket having a much smaller budget simply doesn't have the same ability as Worcester to borrow $101 million up front to finance a stadium.
Right, but to my point, I guess I was focusing more on the wealth of the community.
Sure.
These folks prey, and I will use the word prey, on communities of lesser means, communities that have chips on their shoulders, communities that quite ready are willing to fall for this line that somehow we're going to make you a better community through professional sports. And again, there's no one's ever been able to quantify quote unquote civic pride. And that is what their entire argument is based on. anyone who's familiar with the great monorail episode from The Simpsons, and we're going to post it again because it's timely, where Bart at one moment turns to his mom and who's a naysayer, and she goes, "I'm sorry, Mom, the mob has spoken." The carnival-like Barker who's proffering this to the crowd does the classic, and it's right out of the car business. He takes it away from them. You folks aren't ready for this. This is a Shelbyville idea. That is such classic behavior relative to shilling a near-death investment. It's again, I go to a car dealership on Route 9, not belittling the guys on Route 9, just trying to give you a Worcester equivalent. Go to the guys on Route 1 in Norwood, and they'll engage in the exact same predatory behavior. Except in our case, we're selling a car or selling a truck. In this case, they're saddling a community with millions upon millions of dollars in debt based on an economic premise that is thoroughly flawed, without any real statistical data to back it up. And, quite frankly, they'll be able to monetize their investment, potentially sell out. I'm not aware of, and that's, why I love your expertise, because you're able to look at these deals and provide that kind of that core level of analysis based on on a career about writing in business. But effectively, what the town of Worcester or city of Worcester has done, besides investing in this boondoggle, is they've guaranteed the marketability of the sale of this franchise. Because these folks are sophisticated business people. Never mind the fact that they have both the context and the market expertise to engage in their own investment vehicles to support this. But these are folks looking to monetize an investment. And it's my feeling, based on my spidey sense, that particularly after leaving Providence and leaving Pawtucket, which is why when they bought it, they claimed to have such an affinity for it. At this point in time, I don't doubt for a moment that given the opportunity for these guys to bail, particularly if there's a profit in the short term, that they will do so with great haste. Because all of these folks, Mr. Ryan, Terry Murray, former CEO of Fleet Bank, who, by the way, orchestrated the sale of his bank, Free Market, to a bank based in the city of Charlotte. Mr. Ryan, former CEO of the CVS Corporation, largely given credit with taking CVS to a national player to being an international player. These are businessmen of the highest level. Highest level. And in fact, the publication that I'm sitting in here right now, GoLocal Prov, I'm sure you're familiar with their Worcester operation, right? Did a piece about the ownership group and found that they, in their cumulative net worth, represented the 10th wealthiest ownership group on the planet for sports. So, again, I don't want you guys to, I don't want there to be sudden buyer's remorse, because there's a lot of us who, despite the fact that we love the Pawtucket Red Sox, and I love minor league baseball, feel that we dodged not a bullet, a grenade with this thing. And it appears that the city of Worcester has tripled down.
They certainly have. Yeah, I think, in talking about the ownership reminds me, I've often wondered, and anyone in Rhode Island would know better than me, but Ben Mondor, the longtime owner of the team who passed away, whether there would be a different outcome in this, maybe a different loyalty to Pawtucket or to Rhode Island than what we've seen, because a lot of people, and some quotes at least that I saw from Pawtucket, was they felt like there was not enough of loyalty to Pawtucket for how good of a host they were for this team for all those decades.
Absolutely.
So, Ben Mondor's passing, of course, Skeffington Sr.'s passing more recently, right? Whether those would have changed anything, as someone, like I said, in Rhode Island might know better than me, but I've wondered of whether that was a case there too. Although the ownership does have, many connections to Rhode Island still, not as many connections to Central Massachusetts. But people also feel like, in Worcester anyway, they think there's something that makes sense about the Red Sox top affiliate being in Massachusetts. I've always thought there's that connection between Boston and Providence, and in Pawtucket as well, with Providence Bruins and Pawtucket Red Sox both being the top farm teams for the Red Sox and the Bruins.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas they don't have that same connection to Worcester. But Worcester feels, as I mentioned before, that there's something about having the Boston Red Sox top farm team that puts Worcester in a category that other cities can't have. Portland, Maine has the Sea Dogs, the AA affiliate. The Lowell Spinners are a short season single A affiliate. And I think those two teams have really benefited from having that connection. Lowell had a years-long streak of sellouts, and they've been very popular. You mentioned with the Lasher Park in Lowell is about 20 years old now. It was seen as really one of the great minor league ballparks in America when it was built. Stadiums now, even at the minor leagues, you alluded to earlier, the restaurants and the type of features that you see in minor league stadiums now. My wife and I went to see a Yard Goats game with friends last year in Hartford. And again, that ballpark has all sorts of features that you do not see at McCoy. I remember growing up south of Boston in Plymouth, Mass. We would go to many Paw Sox games because it was so much more affordable than going to Fenway, and it was so much easier to get in and out with parking. Mm-hmm. I remember when McCoy was expanded and renovated in the late 90s, and it was excited to me as a child to go to these games and to see McCoy being renovated with the outfield berm and all those things. But 20 years has passed, and now all of a sudden McCoy looks like a relic compared to a lot of stadiums that are built now, even at the minor league AA and single A level, or AA and triple A level, that is. And even single A. In Lasher Park in Lowell, the new owner took over last year or 2 years ago, has talked about wanting to spruce up that park.
And you're absolutely right, and you're spot on. And the danger to Massachusetts now is they set the principle. They broke the financial discipline they'd exhibited for so many years with regard to sports facilities. You know, the rule was always infrastructure. Now, what happens when the good burghers of Lowell, Massachusetts cast their lonely eyes to, and again, there's no small amount of irony. Full disclosure, I'm chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. Full disclosure, I believe government has virtually no role whatsoever in free markets. But once again, you've got the specter of a alleged, I'll use the term alleged, governor who is a small, business-oriented, free market, small government advocate, has broken the mold, invested a boatload of money into Worcester. You know, is Lowell going to demand similar tribute? And will he in fact have to do it, or be forced to do it by the Lowell equivalent of their General Assembly delegation?
We did see a few weeks ago, my former paper in Lowell, the Lowell Sun, reported the new Spinners owner, Dave Heller, said essentially to the state, hey, where's our money? Looking for his own assistance with renovations to Lasher Park. So you're right in that's another example here. And again, what surprised me as a close observer is I expected that Massachusetts was going to be a similar situation with Rhode Island, that the state legislature would have to approve whether it's infrastructure funding or direct funding for a stadium, as Rhode Island did. That was not the case. And that was, in my eyes, hugely critical, because Massachusetts is not a city or not a state that has typically given money to these. And Massachusetts has stood in a very small minority in terms of states that have not given. California is another one. To use another example from San Diego, where San Diego decided they wouldn't fund a new Chargers stadium, and the Chargers moved to Los Angeles.
Right.
Oakland decided they wouldn't fund a new Raiders stadium. The Raiders are going to soon be moving to Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some cases, again, Massachusetts being in a small minority, and with California and a few others, where they say these public financing deals for stadiums simply are not worth it. So Massachusetts has now gone on to, again, the state money is going just to related infrastructure and work towards some incentives for residential development next to the stadium. But it surprised me to see it'll be at least $35 million from the state. That doesn't include remaking the infamous Kelly Square, which is a big tangled web of streets in between the ballpark site and the highway. Mm-hmm. We don't have a cost estimate for that project yet, but that work, other infrastructure work, and the residential incentive, none of that required legislative approval. And in my eyes, that was as big of a factor as practically anything in terms of why the team is set to move to Worcester instead of staying in Rhode Island, is that legislative approval was not needed, and Worcester was willing to pony up much more money than Rhode Island was going to give, and much more money than we've seen in practically any other case in minor leagues nationwide.
Well, and part of the reason for that was that after the Providence fiasco, it was determined that essentially a tax incentive finance district was going to be established in Pawtucket. Sales tax revenues from that district were going to be dedicated towards debt service on the stadium. Whereas in the case of, and a lot of that pressure came about as a result of taxpayer outrage, particularly post 38 Studios and the whole failed Kurt Schilling investment. So you have a different, launch pad, if you will, in Rhode Island. We've got experience with getting scammed. You guys don't yet. And I'm going to give you a clever kind of follow-up from the mouth of none other than Kurt Schilling himself in a moment. But as a result, the creation of that tax incentive district required legislative approval. And I may be wrong, but I'm assuming that was the difference. Whereas the city of Worcester, being larger than Pawtucket and probably being more solvent than Providence, anybody is, you're right, was able to make a lot of these decisions seemingly on their own without, incredibly enough, any level of taxpayer approval or even hearings. That's what's astonishing to me. I'm sorry, go ahead.
We've seen some other cases too where there has been a public vote, meaning like a referendum, a
right.
vote of taxpayers, not of a city council.
Mm-hmm.
Those haven't often been the case in other stadium financing deals, but they have in some cases, like San Diego being one, where once the public does weigh in some cases they decided not to fund it. It's funny, as a reporter, I think of all the times I've seen press releases from state representatives or state senators of relatively such small amounts of money that go through the legislature. It could be funding to study roadway improvements or for things of that relatively small, and but in this case, Governor Baker has large discretionary funds at his disposal, especially through the Department of Transportation, like we're seeing here with the Kelly Square improvements and other work that they have envisioned here. So there's a little overstating how big of a factor that is that this was able to go through without approval of the legislature and without really a lot of scrutiny statewide. It hasn't received too much attention really in Boston in terms of the Globe or television stations there and others. And it's one that, again, to kind of compare it to how much debate there is around other transportation needs, the MBTA. There's so much discussion around other funding expenditures. In this case, it's gone through relatively very quietly.
Right.
And again, to compare it to how closely debated this was in Rhode Island for several years.
Well, and that is a direct result of and let's get into this conversation just briefly. What we refer to as 38 Stadium / 38 Studio. I will note that one of the big fears amongst activists like myself who are so incredibly opposed to public financing of this stadium was that the governor of the state would use her similar level of discretion over Commerce Corporation, which is our Department of Economic Development funds, to somehow shoehorn this through. I believe the significant, particularly in an election year, the significant level of public opposition would have turned post 38 Studios Rhode Island into a war zone politically, if in fact she had taken that move. But that was always our biggest fear, that you would have that sort of standalone effort that says, you know what, to hell with all of you, here's the money, go do it. Most of the culture surrounding this failure revolves from the 38 Studio investment. And for folks who might ultimately listen to this in the Massachusetts area, that, of course, several years ago, Curt Schilling, number 38, he of Bloody Sock fame, went to the state of Massachusetts and said, please invest in my video game company. And the state of Massachusetts, I believe the polite term would be scoffed at it. Clearly, and again, here's the irony. At the time, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was a Democratic governor.
Paul Patrick.
Right. Who scoffed at it. Now, funny how the small government Republicans always have their day. So, in turn, Mr. Schilling cast his lonely eyes to the state of Rhode Island, who were, run by a bunch of rubes, who claimed, by the way, that they had no idea this was going to happen, and then claimed that this was, and this is why I get into my analogy of being called Dr. Doom. I am a naysayer. I'm a highly negative person. So, the state of Rhode Island pledged, somewhere, I don't even know the point at this point, somewhere close to $120 million in financing. Fairly complicated transaction. A lot of it, ironically, was based on employment numbers, which turned out to be part of the undoing of the investment. So the more people you hired, the more money that they loan them. The problem is that, particularly when you're talking about $50,000 and $100,000 salaries, accelerating hiring also accelerates your burn rate. A concept that seems to be also misunderstood greatly here in by the Solons, if you will, who run what we call Halitosis Hall here in Rhode Island. So, shockingly, this was, and this is also a reflection on the No Boston Olympics movement. I believe, what did Marty Walsh say about that? 6 people on a Twitter account stop the Olympics, something to that effect. So, the 38 Studios investment, air quotes, occurred really at the beginning of the prominence of social media. So you didn't have the organizing tools where folks like myself, individual activists who were upset about something, could instantly reach out to other people. I mean, never mind now where there's ongoing organizations that are on literally alert on social media. I can reach out to several thousand people who are like-minded about corporate cronyism in a matter of minutes and have people mobilized, literally minutes at this point. But that didn't exist back then. So the state of Rhode Island went full tilt into it. A guy named Don Carcieri was governor at the time. Astonishing because what's appalling is the similar lack of due diligence that was exhibited by in your case, Mr. Augustus. There was no real due diligence. There was no board seat. There was no personal guarantee on behalf of Mr. Schilling. Essentially, there was no future. Of course, again, if you didn't support it, you didn't believe in the future, and you had no confidence, and you weren't willing to take chances. Well, predictably, it failed, and it failed miserably.
Right, and you're right in that was a loan. So that was one. That was a deal that the state expected it would receive its money back on.
Right.
And there's a risk there that the loan is not repaid, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem from all that I've read that 38 Studios is absolutely hanging over this whole project, this whole process of what happened with the Pawsox is, in that case, it was a state loan. In this case, it's a city loan, bond from Worcester of 101 million that similarly does not have that same guarantee of being repaid. The team will pay about $1 million in rent and $6 million up front, but fronting all that cost, a large majority of that cost is the city without any type of guarantee that that remaining $60 million or so will be repaid. People have asked, and one of the dissenting city councilors, the one dissenting city councilor in Worcester said, sort of what happens if there's a shortfall there, and what happens if there's a shortfall is that it takes from the rest of the city's tax coffers. And to use the example again of Hartford is that there is a very real risk that that related development does not come to fruition or that it does not come fast enough. And
right.
In this case, it would have to happen simultaneously. So it wouldn't have to be that a developer is able to point to a new ballpark and say, hey, look, we could build next to this ballpark right across the street, right down the street. That construction will have to take place simultaneously with the ballpark. And again, you would have to see that people would want to live next to a ballpark right across the street, where that hasn't been the case with very few other ballparks. If you're in downtown Charlotte, you're in downtown Charlotte. It's not quite the same as the Canal District with Worcester. So you're banking on people wanting to live in a neighborhood where so far there hasn't been virtually any new construction in terms of new residences, and actually very few residences at all. There are new restaurants nearby, but otherwise the Canal District hasn't seen any type of new development. So the city would have to be, in this case, relying on the ballpark to carry all of that forward. And the Chamber of Commerce and city officials say that they've already seen new interest from developers who want to build just based off the news of the team coming here.
And we were told that too, but here's the next caveat, and this is where I call it economic crack. What concessions are those developers going to want in order to build? You see, at some point, somewhere along the lines, someone has to write a check somewhere. And what you've got is this mountain of promises. In the case of Rhode Island, in its first iteration, there was going to be bonds. In the case of 38 Studios, and by the way, we actually came up with the notion of we called it hashtag 38 Stadium as an intentional way to create opposition to this from the get-go. In the case of Rhode Island, 38 Studios was based on moral obligation bonds. Amazingly enough, and this is why Rhode Islanders have no taste for this whatsoever, bond insurance was purchased. The state of Rhode Island, incredibly enough, decided to repay the bonds anyway because the feeling was, and this is a complete myth, complete nonsense, that if we in fact went to the bond insurance, that it would negatively impact the ability of the state to borrow, which is, anyone familiar with markets understands is ludicrous. So we actually in Rhode Island have a history of going out and buying car insurance, wrecking the car, and then stroking a check for ourselves to buy a new car. That's what you're talking about here in Rhode Island when you talk about, again, governmental malpractice. So our friend Kurt Schilling, flash forward a few years of lawsuits, he went personally bankrupt. I wish no ill will on anyone, regardless of what I said on WEEI once about him not being able to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame because of the way what he did to Rhode Island. And knowing Kurt Schilling, by the way, he reacted right away. Anyone can get Kurt Schilling into a Twitter argument in a heartbeat. But it was interesting because and the audio of this, by the way, is on the site lpri.us. About a year and a half or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, Mr. Schilling appeared on a local radio station, AM 630 WPRO, and was interviewed by a local host by the name of John DePietro. And it was his first kind of public reemergence where, we're past the lawsuits. His bankruptcy had gone through. The lawsuits had largely been settled. This was the time, in the words of the great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci, he could come Coco. So yeah, it was a very compelling interview by Mr. DePietro. I had the opportunity to call in and ask him a question. And the question I had was, see if this sounds familiar, was, as someone who self-identifies as a small business, small government Republican, how do you reconcile that with taking $100+ million of government-backed loans with no personal responsibility yourself? And he goes, ha ha, and old Kurt Schilling. And by the way, I have a lot of respect for Kurt Schilling after this conversation. He said, nothing was ever going to go wrong. I didn't think anything was going to go wrong. I had my entire personal fortune lined up against this. We had a great product. What was going to go wrong? It was my job to take that money. And you know what? He's right.
Sure.
The guilt in this case should not be assigned to either Mr. Schilling or potentially the gentlemen who own the Pawtucket Red Sox. If in fact this fails, and I believe it will, the guilt really lies in the hands of Mr. Augustus and the town council who voted in favor of this, because they own this now. It's them.
Sure, and I would guess, having covered municipalities for a large share of my journalism career, is that if you're on the city council or if you're the city manager, you know that you have a real opportunity that very few have in terms of creating a legacy for yourself.
Right.
So few city managers in any city of Worcester's size or Providence or Pawtucket size have an opportunity to bring a new team to your city. Mm-hmm. And I would bet, and I think it's just natural for anyone in that position to think of the legacy that they have an opportunity to create for themselves. To turn that down ought to be difficult for people in that position, because right. By the time we find out whether this deal works is certainly going to be years down the road. It could be several decades until we really truly get a sense of whether this was worth its investment for Worcester. And sure, if you're a critic looking at this, you would say, well, the people who are in office now are not going to be in office decades down the road. So they will be remembered as the city councilors or as the city manager who brought the Paw Sox to Worcester. And that's something very powerful. That's something few public officials have an opportunity to do, whether you're talking about a sports team, if you're talking about, I mentioned like those attributes in Springfield, whether it's a Hall of Fame or casino things that a lot of cities might want to certainly have from an economic development standpoint, but there are a lot of complications to go along with those, and there's a lot of evidence that they don't have the spillover effect that a lot of city or public officials want them to have. So that kind of goes back to the whole balance between, does it make sense financially, or what does it mean for a city or for a state emotionally? What does it mean to look at a T-shirt or look at a hat and know that it says Worcester Red Sox on it instead of saying Pawtucket Red Sox? There is certainly a value there. Any economist will agree that there is a value, those that I've talked to. But is it worth borrowing $101 million? That's where it gets to be a lot more tricky, where virtually unanimously, and it's funny to even hear a lot of sports economists will say that they'll admit that they don't agree on much of anything. But one thing that they virtually agree on unanimously is that these deals just simply don't make sense in terms of the types of investment that we see. And we have seen more in recent years, again, contrasting it a bit to, say, Charlotte, where Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, where Charlotte is based, gave, if I remember right, $16 million in total money in Massachusetts' case and in Worcester's case, we're seeing at the bare minimum $136 million for the stadium and for related infrastructure. So the upfront risk is that much greater. And so on the other end, you're going to have to see that much more development take place to bring in new revenue to help offset that.
Right. What was equally compelling with Mr. DiPietro's interview of Mr. Schilling was, as he answered my question, he, as Mr. Schilling is wont to do, he volunteered some additional information. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he actually said to me, by the way, if I was the governor, I wouldn't have done the deal. Think about that.
Is Governor Raimondo going to, what kind of type of reaction has she gotten in terms of letting the team go?
You know, ultimately, it's largely mixed. There are people trying to stick that to her. Again, the average everyday Rhode Islander like myself, as you would call them up in Worcester, a ham and egger like me, we see no real leadership from her on a number of levels, including that. I don't believe she made enough case to go out there and figure out a way for them to get to do it themselves, because they have the wherewithal to do it. You know, what they're doing to the city of Worcester, whether it's successful or not, what's the term, hubris, that they're exhibiting by putting a financially challenged, a wonderful but financially challenged community like Worcester on the hook for this type of money for their own personal gain, I think is despicable. I don't believe she did make. She's shown very little leadership during her term. She's basically a candidate based largely on spin. She made no attempts whatsoever to get them to, I don't know, recognize the return on investment they'd receive from the community. I'm a capitalist, so they're free to do as they please, as long as it's not with taxpayer money. But there was very little effort made to say, hey, you know, it's been a partnership all these years. Why don't you just build your own stadium? Again, myself and other people, and there was I don't want to make this seem like I was the opposition. There was the reason why the opposition was successful ultimately, because the opposition created an environment where the deal had to be so pro-taxpayer that ultimately it didn't work. The reason why it was so successful is because largely it was built up of a coalition of vastly different types of people politically. But they all came together, tried to check the egos at the door, and recognized that this was wrong. It was a terrible investment. It was a terrible idea. Because understand, in its first iteration, before this crazy last-minute solution in the Senate implementation here, it was going to be based largely on and backed by the city of Pawtucket. It was going to be collateralized at one point, one of the propositions, by their going forward state aid. Now imagine that. A city like Pawtucket, again, wonderful people, wonderful community, tough shape financially, being asked to take their state aid, which is supposed to go support schools and children and all the things that we hold near and dear, we're going to collateralize a baseball stadium with that. Then, ultimately, in the deal that failed, it was going to be the Pawtucket Redevelopment Authority who was going to backstop it. But the problem was the Pawtucket Redevelopment Authority has no other income elsewhere. So if the stadium fails, the obvious question was, what happens then? Who pays for it? And the problem is the state, by setting the precedent that even though they had bond insurance on 38 studios, chose to go out of pocket and reimburse the bonds. And they're still doing it, by the way. We have another, in the next year's budget, there's going to be another, I think, $10 to $12 million where the state's going to have to come up with to do that. So 38 studios just never really gone away, nor has there ever been any significant legal investigation, public investigation, or hearings into exactly how this madness all went down. Because there was a lot of self-dealing, there was a lot of underhanded, ethically impaired activity that surrounded it. The Attorney General of the state of Rhode Island was a part of the House leadership at the time, and shockingly, he does not feel that it's necessary to investigate this, and we should just, and see if you've heard this one before, we should just put it behind us and move on. taxpayers refuse to do so. So you're absolutely right, you're spot on, that there is a hangover effect that will be there and continue to be there as long as citizen activists continue to remind people and educate people on how poor these ideas are and what terrible. I hate to even use the term investment in the same sentence with what's going on potentially in Pawtucket and then in Worcester, because they're not investments. Again, you've got a carnival barker who's managed to play upon the egos, as you know, my words, not yours, play upon the egos and of a few starstruck politicians who clearly are willing to defy conventional wisdom, not from people like me, but from, as we would say in Massachusetts, some really wicked smart people. People who have spent, brilliant people like Professor Matheson, who have spent their entire adult lives studying the impact of this. Which is why, once postulated in the right way and given the time to be exposed, why public opinion changed in Boston about the Olympics. In Boston's case, they looked at what happened with the Democratic National Convention. They looked at the Carney Act at that point in time. They came to understand that you had some people who were going to benefit, and I don't mean this in terms of a criminal act, but clearly people who were either through the halo effect of being involved in the Olympics or potentially from the construction efforts involved in the Olympics. Can you imagine seeing what's happened in Olympics elsewhere? What would have happened given your intimate knowledge of the Eastern Massachusetts business and political environment? Can you imagine what a fiasco the Olympics would be here in Boston?
And that's another reason why I was surprised at how this has played out, is because, yes, Boston is the region where we basically said, we don't need the Olympics. We can do economic development on our own, and we don't need to take such a huge risk to build these new facilities that will be used for such a short period of time and then be stuck with the tab afterwards, when so many people, critics at least, saw that in many other cases the Olympics are money losers for the host.
Right.
And again, maybe this goes back to the fact that the legislature did not need to weigh in on the Worcester Red Sox deal. That skepticism from the public towards something like the Olympics, or even many others said towards the casino legalization bill years ago, is people said, by the time these casinos come online, Massachusetts won't need this as much financially. And many critics in that sense said, look at how casinos can actually be a money drain on their host communities.
Right.
That skepticism that we saw in those other cases hasn't been a factor in this Worcester Red Sox deal, at least not publicly, not yet. The city council has approved the deal, so that's passed. But in terms of more broadly beyond Worcester, it really hasn't been too prominent. There's always a lot more things going on locally or in Washington for people to focus on. But
well, I mean, the term my fear is, and this is, I believe you're going to see this more and more. And our current governor was afraid to do this with the stadium, but she's done it in other ways. My term, not yours again, because you're the adult in the room right now. You're the professional. I'm not. I'm an activist. Is the bums? I call it the political bums rush. The new playbook by people like Gina Raimondo, or in this case, the folks who orchestrated the stadium for Worcester, is to push things through in open defiance, masked ignorance of any need for public evaluation. Whereas that would have killed political careers as recently as 10 or 20 years ago. There's an entire generation of politicians who are willing to claim a mandate for behavior when in fact none exists. And by the time they get things pushed through, quite honestly, it's too late. And given what I call is the short attention span theater of the average taxpayer, they're already on to something else, and it's oft forgotten until one day it becomes today's scandal. Yeah, and so that I fear is a new playbook for this sort of new power politics. We're going to build it. We're going to ask for forgiveness instead of permission, and we're going to see how ships where they lie. And if it fails, we'll just push through. Again, on the bum's rush, we'll just kind of push through the notion that you're being negative and obsessing if you continue to study the failure involved in this. And that's something our governor and a number of people here in Rhode Island and nationally, we see that being exhibited more and more. And I tie that back to how health care was passed. If you remember correctly, there were all sorts of parliamentary moves to push the health care bill through nationally. And I believe that set the tone and created a playbook for how to, quote unquote, get things done. Often at the risk or near certainty of failure, because it just doesn't matter anymore. And the process and the machine that's in place, the spin machine, there's incredible emphasis on governments everywhere on creating their own truth through their own constantly growing PR mechanisms that they build everywhere. It's very troubling. It's troubling on a number of different levels, and I'm not claiming to have an answer other than the fact that in our case, we were able to harness a lot of good people who, through just sheer physical will, did everything they could at every level to fight the bill here and to make it so controversial and so laden with potential political consequences that enough people reacted that the bill that they finally passed after 3.5 years, and I was there, watching the sausage being made. I watched, by the way, the spectacle of a House finance leader, a guy named Martin Abney, literally jog from the House Finance Committee down to the House floor to introduce the bill and pass it before people like me could mobilize another level of opposition. I saw it in the flesh. They actually attempted to do it within one night. And it was only because because it got so late, because people like me were doing everything possible to torture the bastards.
In Worcester's case, there hasn't been that same type of belly of dissension, if you want to call it that. But it did go through quickly. Even the other night, I mentioned earlier, Constantina Lutz, the city councilor who voted against this deal, said that she hasn't had all her questions answered in terms of what this deal might mean. And even one aspect of the city's deal with the team, a community benefits contract, has not been signed. City manager at Augustus said that aspect, that deal can be whatever the city wants it to be. But if you're Councilor Luke, she says, but I don't know what that is. Why are we voting on something before we have everything in line? So for the rest of the city council, they feel like they've seen all they need to see, and they think this deal is certainly a worthwhile one. There hasn't been a lot of dissension in Worcester to this point that I've seen in terms of people questioning what it means financially for the city.
Wow, it's staggering when you look at the amount of money relative to a city the size of Worcester. My reflection is that bright lights, big city. A lot of people got caught up in the glare of the moment, and there's all sorts of exogenous events that could affect this. The cost of steel, for example. In the age of Trump, we're staring down the pipe at continuing trade wars, tariffs, things like that. All sorts of questions in Rhode Island about the true cost of actually building the stadium. The simple economics. What can you charge for a ticket in a city like Worcester or Pawtucket?
Sure.
Have they talked about that at all publicly? Because that was there was a great debate on that in Rhode Island.
Not too much that I've seen. In terms of potential cost overages, if it goes over that 101 million figure, the team is liable to pick that up. Mm-hmm. But they haven't designed the park yet, so it's unusual enough when something comes in at or under budget. Again, I see it as a journalist to know that it simply is not an indictment on this particular project. It's just simply that even if you're doing a home improvement project, things typically go typically enough, go over budget. So in this case, there is some protection for taxpayers for the stadium. That's not the case as much for repaying the bond that the city will take out next month. That needs to, in large part, be paid back through new tax revenue.
I would be
guaranteed that related development is built. The city says that they've been very conservative in terms of that new revenue paying back that bond.
Mm-hmm.
And that again goes back to simply, does the stadium have enough of a spillover effect into related development that will take place?
Mm-hmm.
That's where there's that big gap between officials in Worcester and economists that we've talked to.
Right. Is there any talk yet? And I have a feeling the sausage is getting made as we speak. What the true borrowing costs are going to be for this bond, or for the debt, whether or not there's going to be insurance at all issued for this. I mean, is there any conversation about what the true cost of borrowing all this money is going to be?
Not that I've heard, not to this point, no.
Oops. Details.
There could be those discussions taking place, just something that I haven't seen.
Right. Those are the kind of details that often become an issue. First of all, you've been here for hours. I guess I want to spend just a couple of minutes on Worcester in general. You know, we managed to. My sense, by the way, is that given your great input tonight, I have this sinking feeling that more conversation with analysis was done in the last 2 hours with you here than.
At the Worcester Business Journal, we've tried to do a lot of analysis on this state. It's such a huge economic development project for the city. You know, from just the perspective of a business journal, this is arguably as big of a development project, if it comes to fruition as envisioned, that the city has seen. And we're working to find out more about other stadium deals that have taken place. We know some of those details, but to really look at how this deal fits into what has taken place in other cities. We do know that some public money, I mentioned Hartford before, was largely city money. Alachua Park in Lowell is owned by the city. And whether this has some type of spillover effect in that sense, in terms of other cities, you know, in Portland, Maine, or in Burlington, where they have a single A team, does this open up the floodgates, so to speak, of if Massachusetts is offering money, if Worcester's offering $101 million in a bond, does that change the math in this region?
There is the notion that in the year 2018, and you're spot on. Your concerns are absolutely legitimate, and as always, they're well articulated. The notion that we could somehow get into a stadium's arms race in New England at this point in our history, given all the experience we've got, all the econometric data that's available to us, that would be heartbreaking.
It has happened in a lot of other regions, especially in the South. There was a great piece I read some months ago about the Atlanta Braves farm system, where they had all three levels of their minor leagues teams move. Mm-hmm. Because in any region, and we saw that with Pawtucket and with Worcester, is that team can go to other cities in that region, and they can have a good deal of confidence that city leaders in at least one of those other cities will want to bid for their team, essentially. In Worcester's case, the city had to offer more than Pawtucket, in my view, was going to give in order to draw the team to a new market. And with minor league sports, there's no shortage, generally speaking, of cities that are willing to risk some money financially to bring in a team. And to have, if you're a city leader, they, I think, put a high price tag on seeing Worcester's name in the headlines, and for people across this region to see, oh, look at that, Worcester's getting the Paw Sox. So whether we see other deals like this, that depends on the future of the Portland Sea Dogs or the Lowell Spinners or other teams. To look at two other cities quickly and staying in New England, I remember living in Connecticut as a kid. We went to see New Haven Nighthawks games. An AHL team that is no longer there. And some years ago, might have been 10 years ago now, New Haven decided it did not need that arena anymore. They knocked it down. They felt like they could put their efforts into other needs, and they simply moved on from having an arena of roughly the same size as the DCU Center or the Dunkin' Donuts Center. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, they recently lost their independently baseball team, and they're knocking down their baseball park in favor of an amphitheater. So we see 3 examples in Connecticut. Bridgeport saying, we don't need a minor league stadium, we're going to use that space for other needs. Something similar in New Haven with its arena. And Hartford, where the city was able to, or willing to, put tens of millions of dollars to a new ballpark to move a team about 13 miles from nearby New Britain for what became the Hartford Yard Goats. There are a lot of examples to look at, and it'll be really interesting to see how Worcester fits into all that.
Give us a snapshot. Clearly this isn't the only game in town in Worcester. In the background, when we talked last year, it was sort of a mixed picture economically. It was sort of things were sort of in a vacuum, if you will. You had this sort of wait and see attitude. Are there other projects being considered in Worcester? What's been the sense of the city in the last year?
Among the big things this year has been, if anyone listening has been to or had been to the old Galleria Mall in downtown Worcester, that's now been redeveloped. Just a few months ago, a few hundred new residences opened on Front Street. That will have a restaurant, a bank, a spa. Right across the street, there's a large cafe that's going to be moving in. So that's seen as really pivotal in terms of bringing more people living and shopping and eating downtown.
Now, who are they seeking to draw from? Are they looking to incentivize people to come into the city? Is it seen as a function of housing geared towards the medical center? Seldom do you see people in the free market who have to put up their own money build things without a plan.
I haven't talked to them directly to know if they're targeting anyone in particular. I think it's pretty broad. They're looking to get, as many developers are, younger professionals who will frequent restaurants and have that disposable income. Right nearby is Union Station, where you can get commuter rail trains to Boston. I think that's something that they're certainly shooting for. There's the colleges in Worcester, where city officials and others in the region are always looking to draw more college students downtown. The other big thing going on in this past year or so has been improvements to the landing system at Worcester Regional Airport. They recently announced they're going to be soon enough adding flights to Detroit. We've seen flights added to JFK in New York as well, and to Philadelphia. So that's another area where Worcester sees itself as really on the upswing in terms of bringing in that connection economically to other areas. And so that's been pretty big in terms of putting Worcester on similar footing to Greene in Rhode Island, which has seen its own new connections in recent years, to Bradley Airport near Hartford. Worcester's airport has always struggled from a lack of easy vehicular access. It's not near the highway at all, and to weather problems because it's up on top of a hill. So it has always had issues with the fog. So they installed a new landing system costing in my recollection, something like $36 million, so that planes can more reliably land in inclement weather. So it's still early. That landing system was just put in place in recent months, but we have seen new flights added, and people expect that there will be more too. We've seen new flights added. I heard just today, Boston to Honolulu direct flights. So there's a lot more new connections going in, and Whistler is trying to gain its share of the pie in terms of connections to this region and trying to get more people to stop at Worcester, which is a very small and convenient airport. You can be in and out in no time compared to going to Logan, which is never easy.
Right, or struggling down 146. Is there any sense that the 146 corridor is ever going to be truly complete? That's always been such an eyesore there. It's better than it was, but is that just a project that never ends?
I don't know. Yeah, you're right. The connection going to like just south of the Mass Pike into Worcester, that's been, I would guess, maybe at least a decade ago that was completed. But it's funny, yeah, that 146 connection between the two cities. There's not a lot. Once you get past Woonsocket, and between there and roughly Millbury, right, just short of Worcester, there's still a lot of potential there. Right off the highway, where you have a huge BJ's distribution center right on the state border. But other than that, there's not a lot there in terms of what you could really see happen between those two cities.
And then you see, again, getting back to the ready, shoot, aim. If in fact you're looking to draw people from the populace and the market, say, of the Millbury, Sutton, et al., up into Worcester to see a game, it is not convenient or easy or particularly pleasant to drive there. I take that all the time. My father lives in an assisted living facility in Western Massachusetts, so I go up 146, and on a bad night, weather-wise, it's miserable driving there. Yet
it's not easy. Yeah, a lot of it is divided highway, so you can kind of cruise, but then you hit those stretches where there's the traffic lights.
Yeah.
And there's nothing soon coming on the horizon in terms of bypassing that.
So right now, and again, my words, not yours, it strikes me that, sort of in closing, Counselor, that is there a tendency to see this this baseball stadium as sort of a silver bullet, kind of a Hail Mary pass?
That might be fair. Yeah, I think it seems fair to say that there's a lot riding on this in terms of just look at the investment the city is putting into it with that amount of money. Mm-hmm. I think they see it as kind of if you want to use a cliche, maybe we won't say silver bullet, we'll say the cherry on top.
Right.
Where Worcester feels like it has an easy connection to Boston, it has the colleges, it has more people living downtown. This is what people see as something that can really put it on top, where it does have a minor league hockey team, it has an arena football league team now, it has a growing economy of restaurants, and this is something that a lot of officials see as the kind of just putting it over the edge for bringing more people into Worcester, getting Worcester's name out there in a new way, where a lot of people I've heard talk to, they said they haven't been to downtown Worcester in maybe a decade or two, or however long, are surprised to see how much it's changed. Mm-hmm. And they see this as a new way of kind of thinking it almost like a new Worcester. It's not the Worcester you knew of, where it was kind of an older industrial city. You come to Worcester now, they'll say, look at the new residences downtown. Look at our new ballpark. Look at our canal district.
All right. I was going to say, they see it as pushing it to the top. I see it as potentially pushing it over the edge. Well, maybe you and I should, here's what we can agree. How about this for an idea? We'll come up with a treat from Rhode Island and/or Worcester. We'll fill out, we'll put it in an envelope, what we think is going to be the result, what it's going to look like 5 years from now. And in 5 years, we'll open up the envelope and see what really happened. Because when these are built, it's assuming the construction project goes well, and I hope it does. I mean, ultimately, I hope it's successful. I wish no ill will to Worcester whatsoever. Maybe they can be the ones who overcome this sort of miserable track record. And then there's always that sort of initial year or two where, holy cow, look what we could do, honey. We got to make it to the stadium. The reality is very often what sets in years 3, 4, and 5. Is the ancillary development taking place? Is the promised development happening? Our businesses, at that point in time, existing local businesses will have figured out whether they're going to benefit from the presence of a stadium or suffer. In the case, for example, there are 2 prominent restaurants that I know of that I won't mention on the air, that once Twin River was expanded, these were great local restaurants, significant enterprises, not just mom and pop luncheonettes, who have seen their business suffer significantly because of the competition with subsidized dining or the experience, the Twin River gaming experience. So it's I would say to people, everything's going to be great that first year. And again, I'm disappointed. You can tell my friends at the Woo Sox, say hi for me. Say hi to Mr. Ray. Say hi to Mr. Lucchino. Because I don't doubt that they won't court a respected media source like yourself, as well they should. Say hi for me. Tell them.
They've gotten something of a hero's welcome in Worcester, that's for sure. They got a big round of applause at the city council meeting the other night. They were in attendance, Larry Lucchino and some of the others. And I think a lot of people in Worcester see it as something that sort of vindicates them or vindicates the city. That look, the Paw Sox have this confidence in us. They chose us. They chose Worcester, and that to a lot of city officials means a lot. And again, Worcester did have to give up a lot to get the team. They had to beat out Pawtucket and Rhode Island's offer. They told us that they talked to many other cities across the region as well. I don't know how far those talks went or how much of an offer they could have gotten from those other cities. It seemed like towards the end it really was between Pawtucket and between Worcester. We saw, as you mentioned earlier, the early deal to move to the riverfront in Providence, and that didn't last too long until they turned to the Apex site. And otherwise, the Apex site and what we're looking for in Worcester are actually pretty similar in terms of relatively easy highway access and developable land nearby. Being near the Slater Mill in Pawtucket, that was very attractive right off the river. Mm-hmm. And the architects that are going to be designing the park in Worcester see the raised rail bed that will run along the sort of third base line as something that they could potentially have a really a landmark there in terms of what you could do creatively to incorporate that. It'll be interesting to see. It's Jane and Marie Smith who designed Camden Yards and Petco Park and helped remake Fenway Park in the decade and a half since the new ownership group took over. Aesthetically pleasing. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the park looks like because I'm sure they'll do a great job with it.
Yeah, I have no doubt that it will be a great facility. I have no doubt whatsoever. With the kind of money they have backing it now and the sort of carte blanche they've been given, and the design firm you're talking about has been part of Larry Lucchino's crew, if you will, for a number of years, and goes way back with him. So I would expect to see, short of any environmental concerns popping up, a fairly quick turnaround and getting built stadium. Because one of my last questions for you is the rumors are abound that in fact the Paw Sox will take up residence at the College of the Holy Cross next year. Have you heard anything to that effect?
I haven't. I have thought that they would stay at McCoy for 2 more years. Maybe I'll be proven wrong there as well. It's a beautiful park, fit and field at Holy Cross. It's certainly not up to the standards of a AAA facility. If the team has had an issue with McCoy, they would certainly have one with fit and field. And again, not to disparage the park, but it's a collegiate stadium, and it's hosted a Collegiate Futures League team The amenities there are just not at all to the scale of what a AAA team would expect these days, and it's also very small attendance wise.
But
Sooner.
I was gonna say, so is speaking of small attendance wise, so is right now the Paw Sox.
It's fallen off in recent years.
Yeah, and one has to wonder what the community's reaction is going to be next year, and particularly the year after. Is it worth perhaps a contribution to the College of the Holy Cross to enhance theirs so that they can actually start to build an audience, as opposed to watch one further away and go into sort of a free fall financially? I mean,
it's interesting to think, yeah, and I've thought, not that it's a great comparison to make between minor league baseball and the NFL, but the Oakland Raiders are lame ducks until they move to Las Vegas, and from what I've seen, I don't know that their attendance has dropped off as a result. So maybe some people will feel spurned and they won't want to see a Paw Sox game. Maybe some people will feel like it's their last few chances to see their hometown team before they move up to Worcester. Attendance has been down considerably in recent years. How it ends up going these next few years, if they stay at McCoy, will be interesting. Yeah, who knows?
There you go. Give us a little bit of a, if you will. And again, I'm so grateful for you spending your Friday evening here. I have a feeling you and I could talk business for hours and hours and hours. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed chatting with you. Give us a blurb about the Worcester Business Journal. Clearly, well, first of all, are you going to hire a sports writer now? Or
I don't handle our budget, so I can't say. In the meantime, we have a small staff, but we're doing everything we can to cover this and everything else going on in the area. I think we do a great job with what we have in terms of covering all of central Massachusetts. It's an area of about 1 million people from Framingham and Natick up to Fitchburg and Leominster and Gardner, down to Sturbridge, out to Franklin and Milford. In that area, there's always a ton going on. We do TJX and Staples and Boston Scientific and a lot of those huge companies, to a lot of the little mom and pop shops and things going on in Worcester and up in Fitchburg and Leominster. There's always interesting things. So we cover all of it, everything in between. UMass Memorial and all the other hospitals. There's always a ton going on.
No, it's a great read. You know, the things that the coalition, the values that we place on a publication like yourself is, first of all, is it original reporting? Absolutely. You know, you've got your own people out there, wearing out the shoe leather. And that's a missing ingredient in a lot of media today. Is it well written? Absolutely. Clearly there's an emphasis placed on the written product there. Is it accessible? Yes, it is. And your publication, what I enjoy about it, and we highlight some other publications nationally as well as regionally, is that you take some fairly arcane business issues and you make them accessible for the average business person and the average consumer. And again, that is an art form because you're able to process information in a way that people will stick it through and follow through, and that's in short supply in today's media. So my hat's off to you. It's if folks are considering doing business in Northern Rhode Island, Central Massachusetts, it's really appointment reading. And even if they're not, you can learn a lot, as I have. So I commend folks to the attention. Give us a website again.
Yes, wbjournal.com. Yes, please do read us. You're preaching to the choir in terms of the importance of journalism. I can never tell people enough. Please do support local journalism. If any of these issues that we cover, in some of the cases we're the only ones reporting on it. There's other great journalism happening in our area and in the Providence area as well. But please do support local journalism because it's more important than ever.
Well, and this 2-hour and plus conversation is testimony to that, because these are the issues that you cover and that we try to highlight here are, quote unquote, lunch pail issues. Whether the individual thinks it's in their wheelhouse or not, these are the kind of issues that will have profound effect on the quality of life in Rhode Island, Central Massachusetts, throughout this whole central New England corridor. And to think that in any time in history we are less prone to being isolated that we can somehow ignore what's going on around us is foolhardy. You need, if you're a business person or a consumer, you need to consume as much original reporting and writing about the universe that you inhabit here in central New England. So I'm doing our best here to get people to move away from the canned sort of short attention span theater, quote unquote, writing that takes place on the generic web, and instead spend a little time, invest a little bit of time, and really get an understanding of your community through publications like yourselves. So again, my hat's off to you. So
well, thank you. I appreciate those words.
All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to seal in an envelope. You seal in an envelope. We'll put them in a safe space. What we think it's going to be like 5 years from now, and then a lunch unique to how about this? A lunch unique to each of our respective markets is at stake as to who's the closest.
Sure. Well, I don't know if I have a lot of confidence in my intuition since I was wrong on the team moving. I thought they would stay, but you're right. It's still very early, and how it continues to play out and ultimately plays out will be interesting to see.
No, absolutely. Listen, Grant Welker, he is the news editor at the Worcester Business Journal. Again, must reading. We're essentially passing the baton to Worcester on the Paw Sox. It appear at this point to be everything a done deal. It looks like it's ready to go forward. There are some environmental concerns, but those are the same issues that were outstanding here in Pawtucket. So I think the baton is about to be passed. That doesn't mean we're gonna not pay attention to it. And I hope we can get your continued input on this and any other issue that concerns you. And again, give my love and heartfelt love to Mr. Lucchino and the fine folks at the Worcester Red Sox. There, I said it.
I'll do my best.
All right.
Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it.
All right. I look forward to it again. Folks, we're going to take a quick break right now. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center in the heart of the city we love, 90 Way Boston Street in downtown La Prave. It's a great night out in the city. This is autumn. This is the time of the year we live for here in Rhode Island. We're going to take a quick break. We'll do a little quick wrap-up and talk about our sponsors and just briefly intone about this week's events in terms of the primaries. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we are back. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting as always live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership, coalitionradio.us. A big thank you to friend of the Coalition, Grant Welker, of course, of the Worcester Business Journal, joining us for a couple hours tonight, really for some soul-reaching conversation about the events surrounding the Pawtucket Red Sox and exactly what we're looking forward to there. Just going to speak for a couple minutes, and then we'll sign off for the evening. A reflection on this week's primaries. Well, sadly, no surprises. Unfortunately, Gina Raimondo was the victor. Matt Brown unable to overcome millions of dollars of negative campaign financing and negative advertising. A great volunteer base, folks clearly committed to his victory, and the reality, though, that Gina Raimondo is going to spin nonsense, literally, at every level. When I look at the Trump ads, I managed to mention today on the Lively Explained, when I mention the Trump ads to folks, and when I show them, folks are disgusted that someone would refuse to debate, would refuse to come to the playing field, refuse to engage, and then at the same time spew that type of nonsense. That's just terrible. And if that reflects what the general tenor of the conversation is going to be in the run-up to the Maine November election, we're not in good shape, folks. I can't think of a crew coming from the mainstream parties that displays less imagination, less just ideas. The two principles, all right, the Democratic and the Republican nominee, the word retread is being kind, absolutely kind. And it measures itself in the turnout and the vote in the Democratic primary. My hat's off, even though philosophically I probably don't agree with a lot of what they say, to both Mr. Brown and Mr. Dickinson, both of whom were kind enough to appear on the show. The fact that Spencer Dickinson, by the way, I think ran as good a campaign as he could from a grassroots level, clearly committed significant funds to advertising in the waning weeks of the campaign, was on message and discussed issues, by the way. But the fact that he could rise literally from ground floor up to nearly 10% reflects how starved people were for ideas. And the same thing is true of Mr. Brown. Gina Raimondo should not cast this as some stunning victory. The notion that a sitting governor, with all the powers of the incumbency, with $6 to $7 million, if you will, of funding in a state the size of Rhode Island, could only muster roughly 55% of the vote, that's not a mandate, that's an embarrassment. Now, I understand that the spin machine is going to be out there for the next few weeks, talking about what a mighty, mighty victory she had. She didn't. Clearly, taxpayers are disgusted. As everyone knows by now, she chose to run a commercial denigrating the city of Cranston. Laying at Alan Fung's doorstep the alleged status of Cranston, Rhode Island being a distressed community, when in fact there's a lot of good things going on in Cranston, is, again, recasting history. It's hallucinatory. And of course, the incompetence level always has to play in, because she couldn't even get the photography right. You know, it's become kind of a bad joke. Really? I think her closing comments was, really, Alan? Well, I have to say, really, Gina? A big shout out goes to Patricia Morgan, who ran, I believe, an aggressive, smart campaign. I would have preferred that she engaged in the Republican convention nomination, but clearly the ideas are pulling together a team, if you will, the all-stars, crystallized in Rhode Islanders, potentially a little bit too late for her case the Republican nomination, but crystallized in Rhode Islanders the need for competence in government. Elections matter, and this certainly one does. I'm hoping to get Joe Trillo on the show in the next few weeks. I've had a long, interesting relationship with Mr. Trillo. We've had a lot of fun at each other's expense. But I hope I get a chance to talk with him, because he needs to be heard at this point. Because with him may rest, as much as I've teased him, may rest Rhode Island's hope in this current election. The retreads can't win. On the General Assembly level, where power is truly wielded, it was a night of surprises. Mr. Tiskus, who was a creation of the Mattiello machine, who was neatly inserted into the role as heir apparent with the, if you will, the stepping away by Ken Marshall, failed miserably. Clearly, other candidates who are backed by the Mattiello administration, there were a number of surprises. Surprises that they were actually in the election in the first place. You couldn't help but enjoy Maura Walsh's tweet earlier today. Oh my. Brings to mind the closing remarks of a 1970s era World War II movie, Tora, Tora, Tora. Mr. Mattiello, I fear you may have wakened a sleeping giant. And no, after listening to the Tara Grant show today, I'm not embarrassed by her choice of words. I would feel the same way she did. I might not even be that polite. This also marks the beginning of the end, I believe, of the reign, if you will, of Attorney General Kilmartin. Only a few short months to go on that. No less than Billy Lynch opined on today's Lively Experiment that can't end soon enough. And if you're in the recovery movement, if you're in the cannabis legalization or drug legalization movement, or if you just are a human being and you believe in fairness, humanity, then you can't wait for that to end as well. What will be interesting to see is what impact the true independents have. Daniel Munoz, who's been a guest on the show a couple of times, we'll get him back in here to see how his campaign is doing. There's a young lady running for the cannabis movement for governor. Yes, we'll get her in as well. If you had the effort and the staking power to get yourself on that ballot, our own little show here will make every effort to give you a pulpit to speak from. So the next few weeks are going to be very, very challenging. We have to come to terms as an electorate with the damage that's been done by the Raimondo administration and see simultaneously to try and ensure that that damage does not continue. But at the same time, not elect, well, a second act. And somehow amongst this crew, we have to find a leader who can, what's the term a certain crew likes to use? Lead us out of the swamp. We'll have to discuss what economic development in the state, what form that has to take. I believe that the failed 1970s era use of crony corporatism by the Raimondo administration has started to unravel and will continue to unravel. The statistics will prove that a significant part of Rhode Island's growth has occurred simply because it borders the state of Massachusetts. And maybe that's the secret. Just instead of being like Mike, be like Massachusetts. Without, of course, having a sudden sea change and giving millions away to the Billionaire Baseball Boys Club. The Lieutenant Governorship office, well, there's a disappointment as well. A well-meaning, nice guy, Paul Pence, seems to be willing to wait for someone else to do the right thing, which is to mercy kill the office. Save the state of Rhode Island millions of dollars a year. At the same time, eliminate a launch pad for the personal desires of whoever or whatever, well-meaning in some cases, as they may be, politician that inhabits that role. The General Treasurer's Office, we've had Mr. Riley on, we'll have him on again. On the executive level, that's actually the most important office because we need someone in there, we need an adult in the room who's going to recast the way our state handles money. If not, the results will in fact be dire. All right, cue the Pat's Dr. Doom and Pat's negative. There's simply too much at stake. We need a financial professional in there because in the inevitable case of some type of market correction, our pension systems, our OPED systems are truly on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Denial ain't a river in Egypt. We can continue to follow the same helter-skelter pattern, or again, we can elect Mr. Riley and have an adult in the room. We'll look forward to seeing what latest bond scams are offered to us that seemingly we pass without thought. And we'll try this time around to get a look at what happened to the bond issues from 2 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago. These are the things that are coming up in the weeks ahead. We'll have libertarian candidates on from around the country, as well as Billy Hunt and Darrell Gould. We're going one-on-one with two of the most progressive state legislators and legislative candidates in the state. And I believe what will be, not just because of my personal self-interest or awareness, but I believe will be one of the two most profound elections to take place this year at the legislative level. What will be interesting to see if the conventional media wakes up out of their sleep, decides to stop handicapping elections, and instead to explore the real differences between candidates like Billy Hunt and Darrell Gould and candidates, quite frankly, from around the state. And there are some compelling candidates, independents and others, that we'll have on the show in the next few weeks to explore. So we're going to sign off a little bit early tonight. This show hopefully is already posted up on Facebook where you'll be able to watch it. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course, CoalitionRadio.us, the mothership. Stay tuned. We'll see you next Friday.